Sometimes the world narrows, not because it becomes smaller, but because our attention does. In certain moments, everything else fades away. The crowd, the noise, the background, leaving only one point where all eyes seem to rest. You don't post. Not today. Not yesterday. Maybe not for weeks. There is no announcement, no explanation, no final decision behind it. You simply don't. While others share fragments of their lives, carefully selected moments, filtered emotions, polished reflections, you remain silent. And this silence is often misunderstood. It is mistaken for absence, for fear, for indecision, for detachment. But silence is rarely empty. More often, it is deliberate, even if unconsciously so. You don't post because something in you resists the need to translate life into content. Because not every moment asks to be captured. Because not every thought wants to be witnessed. This choice is quiet, almost invisible. There is no applause for it, no validation, no metric to measure its value. And yet, it shapes the way you exist in the world more than you might realize. Posting has become the default language of presence. To post is to say, I was here. I mattered. I existed in a way that can be seen. To not post, then, feels like stepping outside of a shared agreement. The unspoken rule that life must be documented to be real. But what if presence does not require proof? There is a strange tension in modern life. We are encouraged to be authentic, yet expected to perform. To be ourselves, but in a way that is visible, shareable, and palatable. Expression becomes currency. Visibility becomes value. Silence becomes suspicious. When you don't post, people begin to wonder, are you okay? Are you hiding? Are you falling behind? Rarely does anyone ask a different question. What if you are simply living? The quiet choice is not dramatic. It does not come from rejection or rebellion. It emerges subtly, often without language. You notice that when you post, something shifts. Moments feel slightly incomplete until they are shared. Experiences begin to split into two layers, the one you live and the one you prepare to show. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, attention moves away from the experience itself and toward its future appearance. How it will look, how it will be received, how it will be interpreted by people who are not there. The quiet choice begins when you realize that you don't want to live twice. Once for yourself and once for an audience. You don't post because silence allows moments to remain whole, uncut, untranslated, unexplained. There is a certain intimacy in living without witnesses, an intimacy that feels increasingly rare. When nothing is posted, experiences stay private in a deeper sense. Not secret, just untouched. They are not reduced to captions. They are not flattened into images. They are allowed to be complex, contradictory, incomplete. This kind of privacy is not about hiding. It is about preservation. Posting often demands clarity. A moment must be understood before it is shared. It must make sense, or at least look like it does. But life does not always make sense in the moment. Some experiences need time. Some emotions need silence. Some thoughts need to exist without being named. Not posting gives them that space. The quiet choice is a refusal to rush meaning, a refusal to explain yourself prematurely. There is also relief in it, a subtle lightness. When you don't post, there is no need to monitor reactions, no checking for approval, no recalculating your worth based on engagement. Your attention stays where your body is. Your awareness remains inward, not projected outward. This does not make you superior. It makes you slower. And slowness, in a world of constant updates, is often mistaken for absence. But slowness has its own depth. In not posting, you reclaim a form of authorship over your own experience. You decide when something begins and ends. You decide what deserves reflection and what simply deserves to pass. You are no longer required to convert life into narrative. Some things are allowed to remain raw. There is also vulnerability in this choice. Silence does not protect you from doubt. In fact, it often amplifies it. Without external feedback, you are left alone with your perceptions, with your interpretations, with your uncertainty. But this, too, has value. The quiet choice invites self-trust. Not confidence, trust. Trust that an experience matters even if no one else sees it. Trust that your thoughts have weight even if they are never shared. Trust that presence does not require acknowledgement. This is difficult in a culture that equates visibility with existence. When you don't post, you step outside the continuous exchange of attention. You are no longer trading fragments of yourself for recognition. You are no longer shaping your inner life around an imagined observer. Instead, you live unobserved. And this changes how you move through the world. Moments become softer, less performative, more honest. You notice details you might otherwise miss. The way light changes without asking to be photographed. The way conversations unfold without being summarized later. The way emotions pass without needing to be archived. Not everything needs to be remembered. Some things are meaningful precisely because they disappear. The quiet choice honors impermanence. It allows life to flow without interruption. And in doing so, it restores a sense of wholeness that constant documentation quietly erodes. This is not a rejection of social media. It is not a moral stance. It is not even always conscious. Often, it is simply a feeling that posting would make the moment smaller. You don't post because you sense that some parts of life lose their weight when exposed too quickly. Because meaning needs darkness to form. Because silence is not emptiness, but depth. The quiet choice is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not ask to be understood. It simply exists, like a closed door that is not locked, just gently shut. And behind it, life continues. Unrecorded, unmeasured, undiminished. There is a moment, often unnoticed, when the desire to share simply dissolves. Not because something is wrong, not because nothing happened, but because something inside you chose to remain untouched. At first, this instinct feels strange. You live in a world where moments are trained to look outward, toward an audience, toward validation, toward proof. Experiences are no longer complete on their own. They are expected to be translated, framed, and released. And yet, sometimes, you don't do it. You sit in a room. You walk through a street. You feel something subtle, a thought, a mood, a realization. And for a brief second, the idea of posting it crosses your mind. Then it fades. You let it go. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. There is a difference between silence born of fear and silence born of clarity. The first hides, the second protects. Modern psychology often frames non-posting as withdrawal, insecurity, or social anxiety. But this explanation is incomplete. It assumes that visibility is the natural state of being, and anything else is deviation. But historically, it was the opposite. For most of human existence, life unfolded without witnesses. Meaning was not produced through reaction. It was formed internally, through reflection, memory, and quiet repetition. What mattered did not need to be announced to exist. When you choose not to post, you are not stepping out of life. You are stepping back into it. There is an intimacy to unshared moments, a kind of psychological ownership. The mind behaves differently when it knows it is not being observed. Thoughts are less performative. Emotions become less edited. You stop asking how something looks and begin noticing how it feels. Studies in cognitive psychology suggest that constant externalization, narrating experiences for an audience, alters memory formation. Moments become flatter, less emotionally integrated. They are remembered as images rather than sensations. In contrast, experiences kept private tend to embed deeper. They remain ambiguous, layered, alive. They belong to you in a way that cannot be replicated through likes or comments. This may be why some moments instinctively resist being shared, not because they are unimportant, but because they are too complete. There is also a subtle pressure that disappears when you stop posting. The pressure to remain consistent, to maintain an identity, to uphold a version of yourself that others recognize. Silence disrupts that contract. When you don't post, you allow yourself to change without explanation. You can contradict your past self. You can outgrow ideas without announcing it. You can feel things that do not fit your public image. This is a psychological relief few people talk about. Without constant visibility, the self becomes fluid again. Less defined, but more real. You are no longer curating continuity. You are simply moving through time. And perhaps this is why the instinct to stay quiet grows stronger with age, or with depth. As awareness increases, the need to broadcast decreases. The internal world becomes richer, and external confirmation feels less necessary. Not everything wants to be shared. Some experiences ask to be lived fully, and then left alone. In choosing silence, even occasionally, you reclaim something ancient. The right to exist without documentation. And in that quiet space, something subtle happens. You begin to feel more present, more grounded, more yourself. Not because you disappeared, but because, for once, you were not trying to be seen. The spotlight effect continues to shape our understanding of social reality. At first, we may notice it in small, almost trivial moments. A stumble in the hallway, a mispronounced word, a glance that seems too long. But over time, this imagined attention begins to weave itself into the very way we inhabit the world. We carry a constant awareness of being observed, even when no one is around. It is as if our mind constructs a silent audience, a congregation of imagined eyes that measure our every action. We adjust our posture, our tone, our expressions, not because we are being watched, but because we imagine we are. The subtle pressure of this internal audience alters not only behavior, but thought itself. Every choice becomes a performance. A simple gesture or an ordinary comment is amplified in our minds. We remember the moments where we felt awkward, as if they were public failures, and we forget the countless times when no one even noticed. Memory itself becomes selective, reinforcing the illusion that we are constantly in view. This effect is not always negative, but it can be limiting. The mind, anticipating judgment, begins to censor itself. Creativity is restrained. Curiosity is tempered. Spontaneity is replaced with careful calculation. The imagined gaze becomes a cage, invisible yet palpable, guiding actions subtly yet insistently. Philosophers and psychologists alike have observed this dual nature of self-awareness. On one hand, the ability to imagine being seen by others fosters empathy, social cohesion, and ethical behavior. On the other hand, when awareness turns inward excessively, the self becomes both actor and critic. Life becomes reflective, rehearsed, and partially unreal. Instead of moving naturally through experience, we watch ourselves move. We project our own fears and standards onto this mental audience. The mind imagines scrutiny where there is none, critique where there is neutrality. We fill the silence with stories of judgment, and these stories, repeated over and over, take on the weight of reality. The spotlight is not just external, it is internal, a projection of our own concerns magnified onto the world. Yet there is a quiet liberation in recognizing this. The audience is largely imagined, their attention fleeting and inconsistent. Most observers are preoccupied with themselves, carrying their own internal spotlights, rarely examining ours. Awareness of this truth allows a shift in perspective. The imagined scrutiny loses its power. As this realization deepens, so does the possibility of presence. Actions no longer need to be rehearsed, words no longer measured in anticipation of judgment. Life can be lived closer to immediacy, more authentically. Mistakes lose their catastrophic weight. The fear of visibility softens. Presence replaces performance. In practical terms, the spotlight effect influences nearly every aspect of daily life. Public speaking, social interactions, even private creative work can feel burdened by imagined observation. But the effect is not immutable. Awareness of its mechanisms allows us to reclaim autonomy, to step out from behind the mental lens that magnifies every imperfection. We begin to notice a subtle but profound shift. Choices become quieter but more genuine. Actions, once performed under pressure, now carry a sense of intention rather than anticipation. The mind that once exaggerated observation can now be gently redirected, cultivating mindfulness rather than fear. Importantly, understanding the spotlight effect is not a call to disregard social cues or empathy. It is an invitation to distinguish between external reality and internal projection. Not every glance is judgment. Not every pause is noticed. By differentiating perception from imagination, we learn to navigate social life with both awareness and freedom. The effect also reveals a deeper human truth. We are rarely the center of attention that we believe ourselves to be. This is not ego-deflating, it is liberating. Recognizing the limits of external focus opens space for authenticity. Life becomes less about performance and more about engagement, less about imagined scrutiny and more about genuine interaction. In exploring the spotlight effect, we confront the dual nature of consciousness itself. Awareness can be both restrictive and enlightening. The mind that anticipates judgment is the same mind capable of empathy, creativity, and insight. By understanding the mechanics of the spotlight, we can learn to use attention intentionally rather than being guided by fear. Ultimately, the spotlight effect invites reflection on the very act of being seen. How often do we truly live for observation, and how often do we imagine it? What parts of experience are colored by our own projections, and which are free from interpretation? In answering these questions, we find both freedom and responsibility. Freedom from self-imposed pressure, responsibility for mindful presence. And in this balance, we begin to step lightly, to act without overthinking, to speak without fear, and to move through the world with a quiet confidence that is not performative, but simply alive. Awareness, when tempered with understanding, ceases to confine and instead becomes a guide, illuminating not the imagined gaze of others, but the real depth of our own presence. As we move further into understanding the spotlight effect, we begin to see it not only in moments of embarrassment or awkwardness, but in the very structure of how we experience ourselves. It infiltrates decisions large and small, what we wear, how we speak, the gestures we make in public or private spaces. Every choice can feel amplified, as though the world's gaze is upon us, even when it is not. This imagined scrutiny is subtle, almost imperceptible. It does not announce itself with a loud voice, but whispers in the margins of consciousness. It tells us to adjust our posture, to monitor our expressions, to calculate our words carefully. Even the moments when we think we are alone can be colored by it, because the mind has learned to project an audience everywhere. Yet the spotlight effect is not entirely negative. In many ways, it reflects the social intelligence of human beings. Awareness of others' perception helps us navigate complex interactions, anticipate social norms, and maintain empathy. But like any tool, when overused or misapplied, it can constrain rather than liberate. The mind becomes hypervigilant, a small performance director running endless rehearsals for events that may never occur. Interestingly, research shows that most people overestimate the degree to which they are noticed. A casual slip, a flinch, a minor error. These moments are often invisible to anyone else. Our attention magnifies them. Our memory preserves them disproportionately. We live as if the world keeps a permanent record, when in reality, most moments vanish as quickly as they appear. Understanding this distortion can be transformative. When we recognize the gap between imagined scrutiny and actual observation, a subtle shift occurs. The pressure to perform eases. The fear of judgment diminishes. The mind, once consumed with self-monitoring, begins to notice the world around it instead. Experiences are no longer filtered entirely through a lens of self-consciousness. This awareness allows us to approach social situations with both presence and authenticity. We can speak more freely, act more naturally, and even make mistakes without the suffocating weight of imagined evaluation. The spotlight effect, when seen clearly, becomes less of a cage and more of a guide, a reminder that much of the pressure we feel is self-generated. It is also important to note how the spotlight effect interacts with technology and modern social life. Social media, constant connectivity, and digital documentation amplify the mind's tendency to overestimate attention. Every post, every photo, every shared thought can feel observed, commented on, or judged, even when most interactions are fleeting or non-existent. The mental spotlight, once mostly imaginary, finds a new home in the digital sphere, reinforcing habits of self-surveillance and anticipation. Yet, there is freedom to be found even here. By consciously examining these impulses, by noticing when our mind projects an audience that isn't there, we can reclaim agency. We can choose how much weight to assign to imagined attention, and how much to reserve for genuine engagement. Awareness itself becomes a tool to navigate modern life, without being trapped in perpetual self-consciousness. In practical terms, this understanding shapes how we inhabit space, interact with others, and approach challenges. A presentation, a social gathering, a simple walk through a crowded street. All are experienced differently once we internalize that the spotlight is often smaller than imagined. The mind, when freed from constant overestimation, can focus on what truly matters: connection, learning, creation, and authentic expression. Moreover, recognizing the spotlight effect fosters empathy. Understanding that others, too, navigate similar internal audiences allows us to respond with patience, tolerance, and compassion. We realize that most people are preoccupied with their own imagined scrutiny, their own fears and expectations, and rarely observe others as intensely as we believe. This awareness softens judgment and opens space for more generous interactions. The spotlight effect also interacts with self-perception. When we constantly imagine observation, we may unconsciously exaggerate our flaws and diminish our strengths. By stepping back, by noticing this pattern, we can recalibrate our self-image to reflect reality rather than distortion. We begin to see ourselves as we truly are: capable, flawed, but rarely under the constant gaze we imagine. Importantly, this recalibration does not encourage arrogance or indifference. Rather, it cultivates presence. Life can be approached with curiosity and engagement, rather than fear and anticipation. We act not to impress or avoid judgment, but to participate fully, to explore, to experience. Mistakes are no longer catastrophic. They are simply part of the unfolding narrative of living. As this understanding deepens, we notice a shift in priorities. Energy once spent on constant monitoring is redirected toward meaningful pursuits. Attention moves outward, toward relationships, creativity, learning, and observation of the world. The mental spotlight diminishes in intensity, allowing space for authentic experience and spontaneous action. Ultimately, the spotlight effect is a lens through which we can examine both self-awareness and human sociality. Recognizing it is not about diminishing responsibility or ignoring the impact of actions on others. It is about distinguishing between perception and reality, between imagined observation and actual scrutiny. In this distinction lies freedom, a quiet space where the self can act, explore, and be present without the constant pressure of imagined evaluation. By observing this effect within ourselves, by noting when we overestimate attention and judgment, we reclaim agency. We step into life more lightly, more openly, and with greater clarity. The world, once seemingly lined with spectators, reveals its true scale. Most moments are fleeting, most eyes elsewhere, and the mental spotlight, though persistent, can be observed, managed, and softened. And in this softening, presence emerges. Freedom is not sudden, it is gradual, quiet, and steady. Awareness turns from constraint into guidance. Life, once filtered through layers of imagined scrutiny, becomes a series of moments experienced more fully, more authentically, and with a lighter heart. At some point, understanding the spotlight effect stops being an idea and becomes an experience. You begin to notice it not only when anxiety appears, but when it fades. The absence of pressure becomes visible. The mind grows quieter, not because the world has changed, but because the lens through which it is viewed has softened. The realization is subtle. Most moments do not demand performance. Most spaces are not stages. Most people are not watching. They are occupied with their own thoughts, their own fears, their own invisible spotlights. What once felt like exposure slowly reveals itself as openness. This does not mean invisibility, it means proportion. Attention exists, but it is fleeting, selective, and rarely as sharp as we imagine. When this becomes clear, the body relaxes. Movements become simpler. Words arrive without rehearsal. Silence no longer feels dangerous. We begin to understand that the constant sense of being observed was never imposed by the world. It was constructed internally, reinforced by memory, comparison, and anticipation. The mind, seeking control, learned to monitor itself endlessly. But awareness of this habit is enough to loosen it. Freedom here is not dramatic. It does not arrive as confidence or boldness. It arrives as neutrality, a return to the ordinary, to walking without thinking about how it looks, to speaking without measuring the echo, to existing without explanation. Mistakes lose their gravity. Awkwardness loses its permanence. What once felt like evidence of failure becomes just another passing moment. The mind stops recording everything as proof. Life becomes less archival and more immediate. This shift allows attention to move outward. Instead of observing ourselves, we begin to observe the world. Light on surfaces, movement in crowds, the tone of a voice. The presence of others, not as judges, but as participants. Connection replaces self-monitoring. Importantly, this does not erase self-awareness. It refines it. Awareness becomes responsive rather than obsessive. We notice when attention is useful and when it becomes noise. We learn to step in and out of reflection without becoming trapped inside it. In a culture that rewards visibility and constant self-presentation, this understanding is quietly radical. It suggests that not everything needs to be seen, recorded, or evaluated. That some moments gain meaning precisely because they pass unnoticed. The spotlight effect teaches us something deeper than social psychology. It reveals how the mind constructs reality through assumption, how fear of judgment can reshape perception, and how simply questioning that fear begins to dissolve its influence. As this awareness settles, presence emerges naturally, not as effort, but as absence of tension. The body inhabits space more honestly. The mind rests where it is. There is no audience to satisfy, no role to maintain. And in that absence, something unexpected appears. Ease. A quiet permission to exist as you are, where you are, without constant adjustment. The world feels wider. Time feels slower. Attention feels lighter. This is not the end of self-consciousness. It will return, as it always does. But now it is recognized. When the spotlight appears, it no longer blinds. It becomes just another mental event, passing through awareness. Understanding the spotlight effect does not remove uncertainty. It changes our relationship to it. We stop trying to manage every perception and begin to trust the flow of experience. Life becomes less about how it appears and more about how it unfolds. And in this unfolding, we find something simple and profound. Most moments ask only to be lived, not performed.